One of the primary trends in golf architecture over the past couple of decades has been so-called minimalism. In basic terms, minimalism means using as much of the natural landscape as possible in a golf course. And it means trying to create compelling golf while moving as little earth as you can. Recently, though, some architects have started to push back against this philosophy, or just resist the categories of minimalism and maximalism altogether. Today, I'm talking to two such architects. Tim Jackson and David Kahn are the principals of the firm Jackson Kahn Design. Some of Jackson Kahn's notable solo designs include the Other Course at Scottsdale National and the reimagined Dunes Course at Monterey Peninsula Country Club. Tim and David have an interesting perspective on recent and current trends in golf architecture, mainly because they're looking to move beyond them. I'm Garrett Morrison, and this is Designing Golf. So starting with you, Tim, what do you understand the term minimalism to mean as it's usually applied to golf architecture?
I think that minimalism in golf course architecture is used as a term that generally describes architects, obviously, who quote unquote work with the land, don't move a lot of dirt. I think that, maximalism is somewhat a derogatory term or can be.
It does seem to be that way most of the time. Right?
Yeah.
Minimalism is the positive term and maximalism is the negative.
Right. And, and I think a lot of that's driven by, to some extent, the golf that's been designed over the last 25 or 30 years. And, if you have a great site, anybody can be minimalist. If you have a less than great site and you still have, expectations as far as great golf, there's less guys that can be quote unquote maximalists, I think, and actually execute, based upon those definitions and terminology. But, we strive to maximize what we feel the potential is of any site, regardless from the starting condition.
And David, from your perspective, when you hear about this kind of dichotomy between minimalism and maximalism, is it something that you feel like you want to resist? Is it something that makes you feel like maybe these aren't the most useful terms in the world?
Yeah, I think it's counterproductive. Honestly, I think it's. I know we're about to talk about it, so don't take this the wrong way, but I really think it's a waste of time of a conversation, right? I mean, they're not getting us any closer to really talking about the bones and the nuts of what is really, considered great golf experiences, right? It doesn't really matter, in our opinion, if the land was there and you just scratched it in, or you had to create it from nothing because you started with a flat parking lot. What's that end result? Is it fun? Is it enjoyable? Is it memorable? That's really what matters. And both spectrums can get you there. Both spectrums can make you fail also, right? I mean, ultimately it's on the shoulders of the architects to make sure that it does result in something worthwhile and desirable. So, I totally agree with Tim's definition. And also it's, I think that there could sometimes be minimalism and maximalism design, when you just talk about the actual golf features themselves or the lack thereof. And what I mean by that is kind of like the less is more mantra that, a lot of architecture professors preach. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, kind of thing. And that can also happen on a made for golf site, right? I mean, a lot of times those are some of the most overly busy and bunkered experiences because, well, the land is perfect for it, right? So you feel like that need of just bunkers everywhere because it's a naturally sandy site with humps and hullocks, and those are natural bunkers, right? And so, I could argue that that's maximalism in a way. To me, it's just a circular conversation that really doesn't get us any closer towards a better product at the end of the day. So, I love debating and having the conversation, but I also don't feel like having that conversation moves us any closer to, being better designers.
So maybe they're not really terms that are on your mind when you're designing a golf course. They just kind of come up maybe when you're talking about golf course architecture.
Only when people bring it up to us, quite honestly. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, to us, we always look to maximize the opportunity and potential of a site, whether it's scratching something in because it's already ideal for golf, or we've got to reinvent the wheel because there's nothing there to create something interesting from. So that's all we're focusing on is really maximizing the experience and meeting the goals of the client.
Well, part of this seems to be historical, I guess. And you both came up in the era when minimalism was becoming something that people discussed. And part of the original intention of talking about minimalism, as I understand it, is that it was opposed to a lot of what people thought was going on in golf architecture in the 1980s and 90s. There was a group of people in the mid 90s to late 90s, or even a little bit before that, who were starting to say, let's pull back a little bit on building artificial features. And if we can avoid that artificiality, then let's do it. Let's make interesting golf, but let's build only as much as necessary to generate interesting golf. And I guess that stance had real meaning at a certain time. I wonder if that meaning has become diluted over time. Is this something, Tim, that you've noticed in during your time in the profession, that just kind of the impact of that initial stance of minimalism has decreased over time?
I think that there's always errors in golf course architecture, and you can, starting back in, when Mr. McDonald brought over the template greens and, National Golf Links, and we were off and running in American a little bit before that too. But there was a time, and this is actually an interesting conversation. I think there was a time when it was kind of one-upsmanship, I think, in golf course architecture, and certainly many courses that were designed and built in the 1980s. Big earth moving projects, perhaps a lot of artificiality in the way that the courses were detailed and shaped. I think that the return to a more naturalistic type or style of design, starting maybe late 80s, early 90s, with guys reacting to what had been occurring and saying, hey, let's go a different direction. I think that's true. Again, the flow of design a lot of times I think follows trends. And, and again, the big names in the industries, when they achieve a certain stature, a lot of times it's really interesting. It's almost like, to some extent, the media tries to claw them back. It's like, well, they're at the top of the heap now, so let's break them down and let's, lift these others up. And I think the media has a role to play actually in both aspects. When Golf Digest came out with the America's 100 toughest golf courses in 1966 or wherever it was, George Pepper's list, there were a lot of guys that wanted to be on that list, a lot of developers, because it helped them sell real estate. And so as a result, some of the golf that was built in the 70s going into the 1980s are these very difficult, overshaped, big contour type of features, which created some very difficult golf, but it got them on the list, right? And now, the media kind of did, they rejected that because that's what was popular to a large extent, but they also created that.
We're contrarians. I'll admit it.
Yeah. And, so the quote unquote, return to minimalism, and the architects, I think there were architects who that fits their style, certainly. And David and I, like, we don't, to speak for Dave, but, we appreciate what they do. We enjoy what they do. Again, if we had a site that we could just scratch golf in, that we could find it as opposed to have to create it, we would love that. We haven't necessarily been presented with a lot of opportunities along those lines. We've been given sites, both in our time with Tom Fazio and as Jackson Kahn Design, where we've had to create the golf. We've had to kind of create the environment to some extent and put the golf in it. And we were fortunate that we were taught how to do that, and do it, to I think a degree and a level when it all goes back together, that, you can't tell where we cut 20 feet or where we filled 70 feet because it all looks like it's been there. One of the greatest compliments we ever got, Scottsdale National, Rand Morrison, who's a great guy. said, you guys will never get the credit that you deserve because people will think this was one of the best sites for golf that, you've ever had the opportunity to design on. And so much of that golf course, so much of that property had to be created because it was so flat. It had been graded for lot pads prior to us being given the land to build golf on. So, the owner had high expectations. We knew how to execute it, and he had the resources to make it happen. And he's very happy with the result.
At Scottsdale National, you took an approach that Tom Fazio, whom you both worked for at times in your career, that Tom Fazio occasionally took to his sites, which is that he would create structures that were so big that people could hardly believe that they weren't real. And at Scottsdale National, there was a little bit of that going on, as I understand it, where you had a site that wasn't giving you much, but you were able to move so much earth that the artificiality of the environment is not immediately obvious. David, does that resonate with you as a description of that project?
Absolutely. It was pretty much the number one overarching goal of everything that we do. It had to fit into that believability and natural end result. So as much as people may knock us for moving a lot of dirt and being quote unquote maximalists, we still have that same goal that the minimalists have, and to make it feel natural. But when you're starting with lot pads or a parking lot, natural's not a great, it was already unnatural. So we had to bring that back. And, there were 80 acres of that property that were void of anything. And the remaining 100, 200 acres was ravished by a fire in the mid 90s. So even the Sonoran Desert was hurting. Early on, we knew that ownership and us wanted this project to be essentially a Sonoran Desert restoration project, but not simply by just planting the right plants, but by creating a terrain that made it feel like really something special, and that it had always been there. So it takes a lot of effort and thought to craft something to that scale where the human eye can't perceive what you did and didn't do. And as Tim said, it really is a great compliment for us to hear when people just honestly can't believe what we did there. It was a really fun project. It's just different. But we are always after naturalistic end results in everything we do. We love natural golf. We love natural sites. We just, hopefully one day we'll get to work on a little bit more that we don't have to move the world to make it. But that's our stance, is when you have to move the dirt, make sure you move it as nature would move it. And sometimes it's got to be big.
Yeah, we should know too. It's not just us. Like we get to work with great teams of people on these projects, especially these large scale projects like Scottsdale National. Pinnacle Design, who is a golf course specific landscape architecture firm based out of Palm Desert, California, are just amazing at what they do in restoring landscapes, and they do it across a wide spectrum of environments. So they were absolutely a huge part of why Scottsdale National was successful. The shapers that we get to work with, Scott Hoffman, who's a good friend of ours, was a huge part of Scottsdale National and has done some really incredible stuff on his own now, after Scottsdale. And so that's part of the fun for us, is that it's, we get to work with some really talented people who make it successful ultimately.
Tim, I'm going to frame this question to you in maybe a slightly odd way, but I want to put Scottsdale National within a trio of courses that were built from a desert environment that wasn't offering much in terms of good golfing terrain. Mm-hmm. One example of that is Shadow Creek, a course that you both are quite familiar with, I assume from your Fazio days. Mm-hmm. Shadow Creek was an entirely constructed environment. If you look at what that site was before, it was basically a blank canvas, and Mr. Fazio built something very different from that site than what was there initially. Another example might be Talking Stick. Corin Crenshaw had a similarly featureless environment, but instead of building something really big, they went sort of smaller in scale. They moved plenty of dirt out there, but they also used things like a boundary fence that was pre-existing, and they incorporated that into their holes. And when you go to that course, it feels like it kind of sits naturally in the Sonoran Desert, even though there's more contour there than there was obviously initially. It still feels like it belongs to that Sonoran Desert environment in a way that Shadow Creek doesn't. Shadow Creek is kind of like an oasis. It is completely separate from its environment. So between those two poles, or between those two approaches to kind of a featureless site, where would you put Scottsdale National? How does that project fit into that dichotomy that I just set up there?
Yeah, I think Scottsdale National kind of splits the gap, quite honestly.
That's kind of what I thought.
Yeah. Now, I don't know. I don't know how much dirt Mr. Core and Mr. Crenshaw actually moved on what was the North Course, as I recall.
Yes, yeah, the North. It was initially called the North Course. Yeah,
because if you look at the peripheries of the golf holes and you look at the tie-in points, right there's not a lot of up or down when you get to the edges, and that kind of can be an indicator, unless it was all revegetated, how much dirt was or wasn't moved. And I played it and I've enjoyed it, and I think it's a very interesting golf course, and I think it's great. Shadow Creek is Las Vegas, and Steve Wynn is Las Vegas. And, I think that directed a lot of what Shadow Creek became. And Tom actually gives design credit to Steve Wynn. It's a Tom Fazio and Steve Wynn design. The stories that came out of the development and construction of Shadow Creek, both public and private, being within the firm, are legendary. I mean, it really was groundbreaking. And, Tom never gave Steve a design fee when they started the project, because Tom didn't know if he could execute truly what Steve Wynn wanted. They built the first 4 holes, and then they used a hydro seeder with different color mulch, and they basically painted out fairways, roughs, creeks, greens, and then they put all the trees that were supposed to be on the plan in their boxes out on the golf holes. And Mr. Wynn said, "I loved it, just quadruple the number of trees," right? And so when they built it, and as successful as it was, I think a light bulb went off in Tom's head, where if you have an owner who has the resources and the desires, there's really not a bad site for golf. It just takes time and money. And I know that sounds trite, and I know a lot of people would push back on that and say, well, that's not what golf should be. It's when David and I, one of the first projects that we did, was our only restoration project to date. And it was Sunnylands in Rancho Mirage, California, which Dick Wilson in 1965 designed an estate course for Walter Annenberg.
Yeah, interesting course. Really interesting course in that area, which has a lot of architecture that might be a little bit forgettable, but Sunnylands is pretty interesting looking.
It's a fascinating property. I mean, it's the property may be more fascinating than the golf, but we were very faithful to try to do what the client wanted and restore Dick Wilson's design. And one of the golf course architect critics, well known, came out to walk with us. And it was interesting. He didn't really want to talk about Sunnylands. And he had put a list together of the top, call it 10, 20, 9-hole courses in America, and had Sunnylands rated very highly and never stepped foot on property, and admitted he had never stepped foot on property. And as he was walking, he was like, maybe I got this rated a little bit higher than I should have. But all he wanted to talk about was how he had influenced Tom Fazio and how he designed golf, right? And, did Tom read this article? Did Tom read that article? And we really burst his bubble to say that Tom didn't give a rip what you thought. He really didn't. All he cared about was the client, and if the client was happy at the end of the day. And this kind of ties back into Shadow Creek. Tom knew that Steve Wynn wanted something completely over the top. He wanted something essentially that hadn't been done, to that extent. I think to date when they built Shadow Creek. And a lot of people like to tear Shadow Creek down and say it's more of an engineering feat than it is really a great golf course. I've never stepped foot off of Shadow Creek after playing golf and been disappointed. And David and I are fortunate we get to play a lot of great golf courses. It's vastly different. Are there some things out there that we look at and we're like, from a detail standpoint, that might be a little dated today, this, that, or the other? Sure. But, but to round back into your initial question, sorry, long way of getting there. Scottsdale National, the impetus of it, as far as the earth moving, comes from Shadow Creek. The environment that went back in comes from the Sonoran Desert, more similar to Talking Stick. So I do think it splits the gap, and I think it's kind of the mesh between those two different styles, but applied specific to Scottsdale National, what Mr. Parsons' desires were.
That's really interesting. You sort of use the Shadow Creek method of earth moving, but then tied it back in, which takes a lot of effort and art in trying to make something that is massively artificial to seem like it flows back into the landscape. This episode is brought to you by Club Champion. We're very excited to partner with Club Champion again in 2025. And if you're looking to improve your game this year, Club Champion has a lot for you. First and foremost, they have the most highly trained fitters in the world. They attend an in-house university, and they receive continued education from manufacturers to stay up to date on all the latest innovations in the world of golf equipment. These are career fitters who fit all day, every day. They have no distractions from accessories or lessons or anything else. They're just there to fit you to golf clubs. Every Club Champion store has 65 brands, which equates to nearly 70,000 different head and shaft combinations. This means that you'll be able to find equipment for every type of golfer and every type of swing. It doesn't matter if you're tall, short, if you have a fast swing, if you have a slow swing, if you're a junior, a senior, a beginner, or a pro, you will be able to find equipment at Club Champion that will bring the best out of your game. And that's what the fitters are there to do for you. You know, one of the biggest advancements in recent golf has been in fitting clubs. It hasn't necessarily been all technology. The fitting processes have gotten so much better, and I think amateurs can really benefit from that. Professionals are certainly going to that well every single day that they are professional golfers, but I think amateurs could generally take better advantage of it. So Club Champion is offering a great deal for Designing Golf listeners. You can get a free driver or iron fitting with a club purchase using the code FRIEDEGG, that's one word, FRIEDEGG, at clubchampion.com/FRIEDEGG. All right, let's get back to the episode. So, David, I want to get into some nitty gritty here. Shaping a bunker. I think that somebody who's really devoted to minimalism might say that the goal of shaping a bunker is to make it seem like it was pre-existing in the site, or like
Right.
It ties in to the surrounding landscape. When you shape a bunker, when you look at the finish work that you do on a bunker edge, or whatever else goes into creating the aesthetics of a bunker, is your main intention to blend it in with the surrounding terrain, or is there something else that also influences you in creating that final product?
Yeah, I think there's more to it than just that, but absolutely that is one of the main goals, is to make it feel like it fits in and feels, whatever we deem is natural to that site. What we try hard not to do is just have a bunker that's just artificially popped up and ties down real quick and doesn't really relate to anything. So we're always talking to the shapers about lines and flow, and it's super important. And that goes from everything we're shaping, bunkers included, especially like greenside bunkers. If there's an eyebrow on it, making sure that eyebrow carries through into some feature on the green, so it's bigger and not just next to the green for next to the green's sake. So obviously the math of where those bunkers go is the first step, making sure it's where we want it, affecting the golfer the way we want it to. But after that, it is absolutely talking about how do we make this thing feel like it's always been here and it fits. And it's not easy at times. Sometimes it just falls into place, a lot more clearly than others. But there's also a challenge with multiple shapers on a project too, making sure that those products are coming out cohesively and it feels like they all, were built by the same hands. A lot of times they're not. So that's on us to make sure that, that those final products all kind of jive together. So honestly, everything we shape is with that naturalistic flow in mind.
I've noticed that the bunkering at your courses strikes me as being, aesthetically at least, more similar to what Corin Crenshaw or Tom Doak might produce than what Tom Fazio was doing in the 80s and 90s, or what Jack Nicklaus was doing in that same period, or what Tom Weisskopf was doing, there seem to be some influences of the current trends in architecture on the way that your bunkers appear. Is that something, Tim, that you've thought about consciously, or is the process more organic than that? You're not necessarily thinking about stylistic influences.
No, the process. I mean, I hope it's more organic for us. It's interesting. People, define characteristics of designers, and certainly bunkers can be part of that. And when we were with Tom, Tom's a great guy. He gave us so much freedom once there was faith that we could execute a project and execute the goals of the project. And he allowed us to express what we saw from a design perspective. So, I know, not to keep kind of coming back to Tom, but that's where we came from. If you look at the breadth of Fazio courses and you look at them stylistically, I think they have the greatest amount of differentiation from any big name designer, because he allowed the guys in the field the opportunity to do that. Conversely, there's architects who it's my way or the highway, big name guys that had a lot of projects going on, and, thou shalt not deviate from the plan. Right. And so, we like designing a lot of different bunker styles now. And we've done, in some of our current work, we've inherited some Fazio projects that we're now the consulting architects on. And, the desert course at the Vintage Club in Indian Wells, California, is diametrically opposed from a bunker style standpoint to Core Crenshaw and maybe some of the stuff that we're doing today. And that was set before we got there. But, we have just as much fun taking that style of bunker and trying to either improve upon what's there or make it just as aesthetic as the type of bunkers that we have on other projects. The bunkers, when you stand on a tee, the bunkers are the contrast that you see within that landscape many times, or the most contrast that you see. So the shape and the form that they take is very important. Your eye picks up every line. Dave's talking about lines. Your eye picks up every line when you're standing on the tee, whether you realize it or not. So we spend a lot of time on the bunkers, regardless of what style we're trying to implement, and making sure that the flow is there, that, strategically, obviously we do the math, and that's super important. But, every golfer can appreciate beauty. Not every golfer can appreciate strategy. And it's important to have both the form and the function. But yeah, we spend a lot of time on bunker detail, maybe too much time on bunker detail. I'm not sure, but it can add so much. There's courses that are defined by the look and the style of their bunkering. Yeah. And again, I think a big part of why that is because of that contrast, the shape and the movement. Get the math right from a strategy standpoint, but also make it as beautiful as it can be.
There's something really interesting here that maybe I don't really have the vocabulary for, but I think there's something beyond just blending into the surrounding terrain and making it look natural that can make bunkers aesthetically compelling. I'm thinking of Mike Strantz's bunkers. I'm thinking of Pete Dye's bunkers. Sometimes those features, not just bunkers, but also contours and green shapes and all sorts of golf features that those architects produced, they don't necessarily look natural, but they look cool. And that's kind of that's such a sort of basic term. Oh, wow, it looks cool. It's almost meaningless. It's not really that specific, but there's something about the work that those architects did that goes beyond just feeling like it was already there. There's something kind of painterly about Mike Strantz's bunkers, and there's something provocative and beyond naturalism about a lot of the stuff that Pete Dye did in the field. And as you mentioned, Tim, Mike Strantz worked for Tom Fazio, and the courses that he worked on have a kind of distinct flavor, just as the courses that you two worked on in Fazio's portfolio also have something of your flavor in them, which is really interesting to see. But David, when you think of Mike Strantz's approach to building artificial features and Pete Dye's approach, is there something there that goes just beyond, we're trying to make it look like it's always been there, beyond just blending it into the landscape that you aspire towards in your own work?
Yes. Yeah. And I know, we try to push each other all the time on every project, and sometimes it doesn't come to fruition based on, whatever the specifics of that project are, but we're always kind of looking for, new ways to do things and new ways to not really shock people, but catch their eye, right? Like you said, going back to your "it's cool" comment, I remember vividly numerous times at Auburn during landscape architecture program that the professors would say, essentially, don't ever do something because it's cool. That's not a reason. And now, fast forward 25 years, like I very much disagree. I think, if you get all the other things right that lead up to that, doing it because it looks cool in our world, at least, is a damn good reason. Because at the end of the day, I mean, most everybody experience golf visually, right? And if you could stand on a tee and just be blown away by what you're looking at, to your point, whether it's artificial or real or, natural looking, it shouldn't matter. And I don't think it does matter. And especially, whatever weight you want to hold into the rankings, I don't know this off the top of my head, but there's a lot of manufactured golf courses that are highly ranked and highly loved. If Pete Dye fell into the naturalistic minimalist category, we would never know Pete Dye, and same with Strantz. And they're two of the best golf course architect artists to ever live, for sure. So I admire them, slightly more than, the others that take the minimalistic approach, even though I absolutely love playing their courses. I mean, a lot of Core Crenshaw courses are my favorite I've ever played. So, nothing but respect. But in terms of kind of setting yourself apart as an artist, setting a client apart from what they possess by creating something that is just, unmistakably only there, is something really important, I think, to strive for all parties involved in a project. And I agree. I think that, while we love that natural look, it is absolutely okay to go bold and do something strikingly not natural, assuming it's still, it still has to fit, right? It still has to feel right. And that can be executed in unlimited amount of ways, honestly, with the right creative brains.
Well, picking up on that latter point, when you build something, Tim, that is overtly artificial, or that's not necessarily trying to blend or tie in a low profile way, how do you avoid making it look cheesy? Or maybe more to the point, how do you communicate to your shapers how to make something look cool as opposed to silly?
Great question. I'm not sure we have the answer.
It's got to just be, I mean, I don't know if there is an answer to this question, but it's something I've thought about all the time, because there is a difference between Pete Dye and Mike Strantz artificiality and the artificiality that lesser architects achieved.
Yeah.
But there's something about their artistry that is cool, but that's hard to define, isn't it?
Maybe not. So we tend to fall into the Strands category of, I think, more than the Dye category stylistically when we do something bold, as far as how we then try to, somewhat naturalize what we've done. Pete Dye, I went to Purdue and just sheer dumb luck and timing got to be a part of the construction crew on the camping course when I was there. And Pete Dye was building Whistling Straits at the same time. And
I didn't know that. Yeah,
got to, be out there in the field. And I don't think people really appreciate every Dye design as Pete and Alice, not just Pete. And Pete is to me one of the best designers in use of angles that in his courses, strategically really force you to make decisions. And I think, and he never drew a plan. I mean, it all just came out of his head standing out there in the field, and we would, work on golf holes, 6, 7, 8, 9 times, reshaping, reworking, doing whatever. But the end result was worth it. I had the good fortune recently to play, PGA West Stadium course, and in 1985, 86, I think, when he did that in La Quinta, California, there's so many things out there that are just still so astounding. I mean, to stand on 16 fairway and look at San Andreas and know Pete was standing somewhere close to there and just said, you know what, I got an idea. let's do this. He and Strantz, I think, both had no fear. And I think that's the commonality between the two, is that they were not afraid to do very big, bold things. How they applied their art was completely different. I'd like to think that, David and I are not afraid. But our art definitely follows more of the Mike Strantz lineage than the Pete Dye lineage.
And I think you mentioned something about when Pete was working on the course, and he reshaped a hole, 8 or 9 times. I think that's part of it too. Not you, as an artist, your eye knows when it's right. You may not be able to express why, but you just know, like, the lines aren't working, the scale's not working, the perspective isn't working. It just, something is not right. And so you know well enough to either start over or move things around or try this or try that. And I think that's, that coupled with the artistic eye gets you somewhere. Whether you're trying something bold or trying to fit it in natural, it's the same technique. So not being scared to try something and not being scared to erase it and try again. At Scottsdale National, we struggled the hardest on number 17 green, other course. What we built was nothing what we had on paper. And it actually it evolved from a big earthwork imbalance that came late in the game. The earthwork contractor came to us and said we had 100,000 extra yards that, from rock expansion as they were digging, and there was nowhere on plan to put it. And so we found a place that happened to be behind 1 green and left of 17 green, just spatially. And, through a lot of trial and error, it ended up making both of those holes better. But we completely rebuilt the 17th green complex 5 different times, 5 different concepts, until that final one was like, this just feels right. And we had arguments, of version 1, 2, 3, and 4 as they were shaped in the dirt. And it just, one of us or 2 of us or 3 of us, would either agree or disagree. And it's like, all right, if we're not all in consensus, then we got to rebuild. We got to do it again. So, that's a huge part is knowing when to stop, and knowing when you need to keep pushing forward to find what's right.
Yeah, that does seem to be the difference, the handmade quality of really good looking golf features. It's hard to do that without having the architect be heavily involved and without these revisions occurring. Mm-hmm. And, when people talk about why Pete Dye's courses still look good, they don't look dated, I think it's partly because they do still feel handmade. And there's a specificity of vision there that is tough to produce if you're just having shapers come in or contractors come in and build something, and you don't then go back and revise it. And so that extra personal touch seems to be really important, even if it's hard to define the point at which something begins to look cool or to feel right. Feel right is the phrase that I hear you using quite a bit. Tim, I wonder, when you look at Mike Strantz's courses, and just for context for people who maybe don't know much about Mike Strantz, Tobacco Road is a popular Mike Strantz course. There are a lot of Mike Strantz courses in North and South Carolina that remain very popular today. And unfortunately, he died when he was too young and didn't end up perhaps having the massive influence on golf architecture. I mean, his influence is still very large, but you just wonder how much more could have been done if he had lived to a ripe old age. Mm-hmm. When you look at Mike Strantz's work, Tim, what inspires you about his stylistic approach or his aesthetic approach?
Specifically, his ability to create beautiful looking golf holes and spaces, and kind of in different ways too. My first experience with Mike Strantz, David and I had the amazing good fortune to redesign the Dunes course at Monterey Peninsula Country Club.
Yes.
And, when in the whole way that came about was extraordinarily organic, just sheer dumb luck and timing. But when we first experienced the Dunes course, which was I think a 1995, 1996 Reese Jones design for the club, we played the Dunes course, and David and I were driving back to the clubhouse, and you passed the first tee on the shore course, which Mike Strantz had done, I think, in 2003. And it was like full stop. We were just sitting there staring at the first hole, and just the lines that he created, the movement that he created, the way the fairway moved with the bunkering, and the bunkering nestled into the spaces. It's gorgeous. It is truly gorgeous. And, so when we were, again, given the opportunity on the Dunes course, they said they wanted something as good or better than the shore course. And we were like, we don't know if we can do that, because it is so very, very, very good. And so, the restraint that Mike utilized on the shore course and still created a tremendous amount of beauty. You can't move a lot of dirt on the Monterey Peninsula. One, there's a lot of rock, so it gets expensive. And two, coastal California, the agencies get very, very nervous when they see anything that we would consider a small earthwork number kind of coming in front of them. And so looking at what he did in the Carolinas, and I've been fortunate to play a couple of his courses, Tobacco Road included, the scale that he created, the movement that he created, there's no way that he could have done that at MPCC on the shore course. Yet he created just as beautiful and just as interesting a golf course, but in a far different fashion. And I think that's just true recognition of how amazing an artist that he was. He was an artist who happened to be a golf course architect. And he was able to apply his art in many different ways and still create a tremendous amount of beauty and interesting golf.
So I want to end with a topic that maybe is a little bit tired at this point, but maybe we can go somewhere new with it. And that is the question of what's next in golf architecture. Often the kind of cliched answer to that right now would be that what's next is something after minimalism. People say minimalism has been the primary trend in golf architecture for the past 30 years. And so clearly what must be next is some form of maximalism or some form of pushback against minimalism. So David, when you think of the future of golf architecture, what do you think of? Is it something along these lines, absorbing different influences from the past to go in a different direction from minimalism? Or is that not a useful frame of reference for you?
I don't know. I mean, I think that eras of any art or architecture or fashion, after a certain point, it just gets redundant and people, quite honestly, just not get sick of it, but they're tired of it. Like, all right, we get that. That's great, but kind of need something fresh. It's hard to really obviously predict where that's going to go. I hope it goes down the road of just more variety of stuff and not, this is probably ignorant to say because it probably won't happen, but I would hope that another trend doesn't just get started and we just hash that out for the next 2 decades and now we're in the same boat, right? But history, it's probably going to prevail and that will happen. But I think more non-traditional golf is definitely a wave that will be ridden for quite a while. And by that, I mean anything that's not a, quote unquote, par 72, 7,200 yard championship course. Stylistically, that could be anything. But I think more non-traditional golf properties are really cool. Faster, shorter experiences are definitely a trend, just with all of our attention spans and other, just our time in life is getting chopped up more than it used to be decades ago. I think the artificial artificial turf aspect of golf could be somewhat of a trend in a way, with given to the right teams of people, I think could be executed into some really, really cool projects. One of which we're about to hopefully open up later this year. I just hope that we as an industry maximize the variety of products that are being put out there. Because too much of the same, even if it's a good thing, is just it's not great for users at the end of the day. We have a lot of golf out there, a lot of golf. And I think that's some of the knock that I personally put on the minimalistic approach, which I love. Like I said earlier, I absolutely love it. But it's like, okay, we get that. We know that is great. We have enough of it. Let's try something else. Let's try to find that next thing that other people want to emulate, and then try to find something else. So, I'm excited about the future. I'm excited about, our future projects. And I'm excited to see what other architects do, because I think the more varied stuff that comes out and is proven to be successful, I think owners out there will have more, or will feel less risk in doing something that kind of bucks the trend. And I think that's kind of where the tipping point's at right now. It seems like owners are getting a little bit more open to trying something different that may not, quote unquote, kind of fit the mold.
Tim, anything to add to that?
I think that there are many different types and styles of golf course architecture that are ongoing, even when a certain type of golf maybe predominates. And a lot of it is driven by what the media chooses to focus on and say, and there's so many more options and outlets for golf media now than there ever have been, right? But if the media, in certain aspects of the golf media say, hey, this is how golf should be designed, this is what we're going to focus on, that's what people perceive to be that trend or that style or that movement in golf. And I think there's always guys who are, either working against that trend or doing something different, but they may not get the, the recognition or the, highlight of their work other than what the media again chooses to focus on. And I think part of it comes down to that, there's certain perceptions that you're more golf savvy if you believe minimalism is how golf should be designed versus any other way. And, guys sitting around and trying to discern, which template green this is. Is it a double plateau, what's the angle? And no, it's more of a Barrett's. And so those are, great conversations, and if people are interested in that, I don't certainly take away from them wanting to have those conversations. But like Dave said, I just hope that, the variety in golf continues. The bigger the tent is, the more variety there will be, and hopefully the more enjoyment for the end user. If we all had to play the same golf course day in and out, time and time again, we get pretty sick of it, regardless of how good it is, I think, ultimately. So I think that that's important.
All right. Well, Tim and David, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Really interesting discussion, and hope to have you guys back on at some point in the future.
All right. Thank you, Garrett.
We'd love to. Thanks, Garrett.
This episode of Designing Golf was produced by PJ Clark. Thank you, PJ. Speaking of PJ, he's going to be back on Designing Golf pretty soon. We're going to do a Golf Architecture 101 episode coming up here. So it'll be good to have PJ back on talking about some 101 concepts in golf course design. Something new that you should keep an eye on from Fried Egg Golf is that we have a new website, thefriedegg.com. We relaunched our website about a week and a half ago, and we're really proud of it. It looks great. And I think that you can explore our content at a more robust level now, especially the golf architecture section of our website is much more navigable. So go check that out, thefriedegg.com, if you haven't already. And to get the most out of our website, you should join Fried Egg Golf Club. Yes, we did rename it from Club TFE to Fried Egg Golf Club. We thought that would make a little bit more sense, and we used the relaunch of the website as an opportunity to do that. But Fried Egg Golf Club is $120 a year, and you get a lot with it, especially the wonderful community that we're building within that website, as well as at events that we're holding and everything like that. I think that's the best part of it. You just get to meet people who are avid golfers, who are really into the game, into the architecture, into the competitive golf side. So that's a lot of fun. Check out Fried Egg Golf Club. All right. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back again soon with another episode.